This is a device that, when it's switched on, it enables paranormal photography in its environment. And I discovered it way back in 2001 through the good offices of Mark Macy, who is one of the has been one of the primary investigators of ITC and EVP. Mark was actually responsible for my, dipping my toes into this whole field so many years ago. And my first exposure to it, to the whole world of paranormal photography, was through his work with the Luminator. Let me run this. This is a very rough edit. It's the first rough cut of this video, and I'll play it. And then if there are any questions afterward, just anyone feel free to ask. All right, so let me share my screen. Let's see.
Back in 1995, I met a writer and researcher named Mark Macy. Mark was one of the foremost investigators of instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, communication from the afterlife via modern electronics. Another aspect of Macy's work involved repeatable paranormal photography, thanks to a device known as the Luminator. The Luminator was originally developed as a diagnostic tool. Polaroid photographs of healthy clients taken within the Luminator's field would turn out as expected. Those of ill or out-of-balance clients would display baffling anomalies, such as additional faces, anomalous light effects, transparency, and various kinds of distortions. The Luminator was invented by Patrick Richards, whose diverse professional background included both climate control engineering and natural healing methods, such as acupuncture, homeopathy, and craniosacral therapy. In the 1990s and 2000s, he operated clinics in Michigan and New Jersey. In his engineering days, Richards had designed and produced destratifiers, devices that circulate the hot air that's normally wasted when it rises to the ceiling. Ceiling fans are one example. Another is this portable device, a variation on one that Richards had designed for domestic use. It's a simple vertical chamber with two fans which pull in air at the bottom and discharge it at the top. To produce the Luminator, Richards added a vertical plastic tube with smaller tubes wrapped around it. These smaller tubes contained a series of liquids that were said to have been homeopathically charged by means of concentrated attention. This was said to influence the air passing through the device, creating a subtle field in the room where the device was running. One of the truly odd facts about the Luminator is that its effects were visible only on a particular type of photographic material, the original Polaroid 600 film, which unfortunately was discontinued in 2010. But fortunately, by then plenty of evidence had been gathered. In 2001, Mark Macy conducted 3 demonstrations in the New York City area and 1 in the San Francisco Bay Area. He used a Luminator that had apparently been fine-tuned by Richards to emphasize these paranormal effects. Here are some of the results. Skeptics have asserted that these effects are the result of double exposure, moving the camera while the shutter is open, and so forth. However, these Polaroid cameras are not capable of double exposure, and in any case, a double exposure would duplicate the entire picture, not just particular details. The same holds true for camera motion, which would streak the whole picture, but that's not what we see in these Luminator shots. So what do these anomalous faces and other features represent? Mark Macy believes that at least some of these faces represent folks on the other side attempting to communicate with us.
2 years ago in Colorado Springs, I gave a workshop and I took a picture of a local psychologist named Joyce. And when the picture developed, John Denver's face was superimposed over Joyce's face. You can see it here peeking out to your left.
Others suggest that some may depict a subject's former lifetime. Some have theorized that other types of paranormal communications, such as ITC, occur more easily during times when solar activity and the Earth's magnetic field create conditions similar to what the Luminator achieves on a very small scale.
So I've since learned, actually just this morning, that at least one other practitioner of the Luminator, Jack Stuckey, has been using the current crop of Polaroid 600 film, and it seems to be working with his Luminator. So I'm going to revise the video for that reason. But anyway, that's the basic story. It's a puzzling phenomenon. I don't have any explanation for it.
You did a lot of work on ITC. Perhaps you'd like to explain to people some of the things that you did there in your film.
Well, ITC, instrumental transcommunication, as most of you know, is it's short for communication with the other side through electronics. Through any modern electronic device that can record or reproduce audio or visual material has been used at one time or another to contact the other side. Some of this communication is passive. People will receive it unexpectedly. Others will deliberately ask. Will deliberately experiment. This all started back in the 50s, actually. It was accidentally discovered when tape recorders first became consumer items, and people started hearing voices on their tapes that didn't belong there. And in the United States, this was generally dismissed as, well, maybe the machine is picking up some radio station or something. So not much attention was paid to it over here. But in Europe, it was a different story. A number of scientists and experimenters became involved in trying to understand what this was all about and to furthering communication with the other side. The first one, as far as we know, was a man named Friedrich Jürgensen, who was a Swedish filmmaker and artist, who was out one night recording nocturnal bird sounds for a documentary. And when he played the tape back, in the gaps between the bird sounds, he heard faint voices discussing nocturnal bird sounds. And this kind of blew his mind. He said, well, isn't that quite a coincidence that a local radio station should be discussing nocturnal bird sounds? But this all turned around for him when shortly thereafter, he discovered the voice of his deceased mother calling him by his childhood nickname, Friedel. So this blew his mind, and he finally decided, okay, he threw up his hands and said, okay, we needed to study this scientifically. So he started recording. He would roll his tape recorder and he would ask a question and leave a pause, ask another question, and so forth. And when he played the tape back, in the gaps where there should have been nothing at all, he heard faint responses to his questions, which made sense. And he recorded thousands of these anomalous voices, figured out that they must be from what we call the afterlife, and was joined for a time by a man named Konstantin Raudava, who's a Latvian professor and researcher and so on. Raudava worked with Jurgensen for a while and then went off on his own and did his own experiments. By the time he died in 1974, he had recorded between 60 and 70,000 of these anomalous voices on his tapes. And then after he passed, his voice showed up on his colleagues' recorders and so on. And this is actually a tradition of experimenters going to the other side and then communicating themselves by various means. So that's how the ball got rolling. This practice, usually using at that time cassette recorders, easily available, ordinary common cassette recorders, were used by a lot of people contacting their departed loved ones, and many of them got really quite impressive results. So eventually, this what's called the electronic voice phenomenon became known as instrumental transcommunication. That was the broader term for it, and that included both visual and auditory contacts with the other side. Experiments were receiving messages from their loved ones and so on and their colleagues on TV sets and fax machines and later on personal digital devices and so on. There's a professor in the University of Western Ontario right now who's got a grant to study afterlife communications on smartphones. People are receiving apparently quite a number of text messages and so on that can't be traced to a live source. And so this ITC is a work in progress. We don't understand why or how it works. We don't understand what impedes it or encourages it. It may be the space weather. It may be the phase of the moon. We know that having a personal connection with someone on the other side helps. That emotional bond helps to make and sustain the contact. But beyond that, these things are quite mysterious to us. And whether we understand the principles or not, the mechanism of action, we do seem to understand what helps it work. And that, I think, is the important thing. That people who have a deep connection with someone on the other side, or who are enthusiastic experimenters and are curious about this, seem to get results. Sometimes it takes some time for the phenomena to develop. Other people get it right away, and other people get it in an involuntary way. It was things just happening to them, as it happened to some of the early experimenters. So that's the short of it. If you want to see a lot more detail, you can watch my documentary called Calling Earth, which is on, it's now on both Vimeo and YouTube. And the shortened URL is bit.ly, bit.ly/callearth. Yeah.
It is the leading documentary on ITC. I think there's nothing like it. It's just it's an incredible work. What about the skull experiment, Dan? The footage that you and Tim did is just so historic. There's very little current stuff on the skull experiment. And if you hadn't got that footage, it would have all just faded. Even the SPR investigators, I think they're all dead now, the team. And you were able to get so many interviews. What was it that stood out to you about Skull?
Well, it's hard to say because this happened so long ago. I had read Grant and Jane Solomon's book called The Skull Experiment initially. It was years ago. And just from how they framed the story, it seemed to me that this was quite a legitimate effort. And when Tim and I started out to to do these documentaries on ITC, we originally hadn't considered Skull, but then Tim actually brought it up and said, "Hey, let's do Skull." And I said, "Fine, let's do Skull." So we contacted the folks there who were still living at the 17th century farmhouse where the experiment was conducted, and they were kind enough to let us come over, and they did some really good reenactments of the experiment, which had been taking place several years prior. They also gave us some of their materials, like the tapes, the audio tapes that they recorded of every session. They didn't give us every tape. They gave us some highlights from these sessions, which we used in our documentary. And then they kindly sat for interviews with us. One of the things that impressed me about it was that it was their perseverance. It took them about a year of doing regular sittings before they got regular repeatable phenomena occurring. And this is apparently the case on both sides. It takes a while to make the connection, to translate between the dimensions, if you will, and then to begin to collaborate, which they did. This was indeed an experiment where those on this side and those on the other side collaborated in working out these experiments and perfecting them. Some of the most delightful ones were the photographic experiments, where at first the Skull team were asked to put a conventional film camera on their central table, their sort of seance table. And in the dark, they heard the camera levitating and floating around the room with the shutter clicking and then landing back on the table. And when they developed the film, which, as I recall, was 36 exposure roll of color film, they found on this film 11 black and white images, perfectly framed black and white images, that they were told represented actual pictures that existed somewhere in the world. And they were actually able to track down a few of them. Following the experiments with the camera, they were asked to just put the roll of film on the table and we'll see what we can do. And so they did that. They used a form of Polaroid 35 millimeter film that could be developed in a little desktop development machine. So they used that. And in those experiments, they found an amazing variety of visual material on these films. Some of them were individual frames that had images of deceased individuals. Some had signatures of notable individuals. Also, some of the films, the phenomena ran the full length of the film with no frame divisions, and this included writings and paintings and poetry in various languages, as well as the signatures of prominent individuals, both in the afterlife sphere and elsewhere. They did some experimentation with ITC. They had a little tape recorder that they were using just as an amplifier, and they had been advised to build a little device to plug into it that would receive communications from the other side, and indeed it worked. And when they asked, actually it was one of the SPR investigators who asked, was there any way this could be improved? They, on their next roll of film, they got a diagram showing exactly how to improve reception with this device. And the diagram was signed TAE, which turned out to be a perfect replica of Thomas Alva Edison's signature. So it went on and on and on and on. And, what we have, our film only runs about 85 minutes. And so we really were only able to scratch the surface of the experiment. The Robin Foy's book called Witnessing the Impossible, it's about this thick, includes his notes from every one of the 500 sessions. And I cannot confess to having read that whole book. It's huge. Mm. And then there's the Solomon's book called The Skull Experiment. And there's the SPR issued a volume called The Skull Report, which is actually available through Amazon. It was the conclusions of the scientific investigation. And so there's plenty of material out there. And I'm glad we were able to make the documentary, which keeps it visible. Actually, in the last month or so, I've been contacting people who have pirated the material and have put it on YouTube, and threatening them with with copyright infringement. But in one case, it was a woman who actually did some of her own original research, but used some of our footage. So I issued, it's called a copyright takedown notice with YouTube, and giving them a week to do it. So this woman contacted me, and we had some dialogue, and I said, okay, you're free to use the material as long as you credit us in the YouTube description. One guy had taken our whole film and put it on YouTube, and it had actually been up there for quite some time. I had no idea. So I contacted him, and he agreed to put full credits in his YouTube description. And I was actually grateful that he had put the film on when he had. There were a lot of views, a lot of comments. I had kept our films strictly on Vimeo for reasons of quality, but I've finally given in and put them both on YouTube for the masses, as it were. And so anyway, I'm Tim and I are glad to have played our part in this, in keeping the word out there. So
what do you think is the future? I mean, I can remember back in 2000, we were so excited about Mark Macy's work and about electronic communication, and we used to talk about the mediumship of the tape recorder, that it would replace the human mediums, that somehow this whole idea of having a soul phone, of getting direct communication with the other side electronically. What do you think about that possibility? Having been involved in it for so many years.
Well, I'm certainly in favor of further experimentation. I tend to lean toward human mediumship at this point as the best way to connect with the other side. Developing one's own sensitivities, one's own ability to connect, however we can do it, I think is very important. That does not rule out technical experimentation. To me, the most important thing about ITC is that it provides some objective evidence of communication with the other side. Whether it proves to be the most efficient way, most effective way to do it, I have no idea. We'll see. I know Gary Schwartz has been working on his soul phone for ages. I think it's a toss-up at this point. It's like any other. To me, science is at its best is basically organized curiosity, and I think it's fine that people are experimenting and trying to push this thing forward. I have no judgments about it particularly. I just hope we don't get too focused on the technology as other than a possibly useful vehicle for opening up more communication with the other side. But to the extent that we rely on external mechanisms, we may be kind of looking in the wrong direction. Ultimately, I think we are responsible for our own connection with the greater reality, in the form of our own consciousness, for one thing, and also in the realm of communication. So I guess that my feelings about it are that sort of a mixed bag. I think Sherry has a question.
Okay, let's open it up for questions and sharing. We'd like to hear of your experiences. Dan, you can moderate yourself, Dan. You can take it away.
Is it okay to speak or not? I'm not sure what you said.
Yeah, sure, Sherry, go ahead, please.
Okay. First, and I've told you this before, I've seen your films and I love them. And because when I first started to practice EVP, that film of yours was it's such class. It's so well done. I just have to say I love it. And any one of you who haven't seen it, you must see Calling Her. Well, both are wonderful. But I also want to say, I think that we all work differently, but like Sonia, for example, Rinaldi, only works through instruments. She doesn't do the mental mediumship, and that's her thing. And she's, for me, I never trusted what came in before I could hear it. But as I've said before, I think the value so much of EVP is that those who are really bereaved can sometimes hear it too. To them, it is, I have moms will, and also, I don't know how it happens either, but if a mom asks me for a reading and I do it, I've never had it happen yet that their child doesn't come, that they don't, that something doesn't come through that touches that parent, or they sometimes recognize the voice on a number of EVPs. And for them, they'll write me and say, when I'm depressed, I go to the recordings and I hear my child's voice. So I think there's room for both, but both instruments and direct, mediumship, because with the instruments, we get audibility and visibility. And that is what some people will really break through to them, and help them to believe that, yes, their loved one has gone on, is not over. And so I think there's a place for both in our field, both the instruments, because they're doing it, and also because mental mediumship is obviously, you have to have that opens probably for it to work so well as well. But I just think there's room for both EVP and mental mediumship. And for some people, that may be a better way. That's just my opinion.
Actually, Sherry, I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right about people, discovering the whole field of afterlife communication and discovering the presence of their loved ones and so on. And I think that is one of the best reasons to experiment with ITC and to practice it. So no argument there at all. Thank you.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan, for coming on and presenting the information that you have. I'll just say real briefly that there does seem to be a pretty well accepted idea these days in ITC that there is a mediumship aspect that goes along with it being able to come through. So there's that as well. So I don't think mediums are necessarily going to go away around ITC, because they tend to be developing mediums who receive it, or well-established mediums initially, although it can show up in lots of ways. But what my real question is, here's what I really want to ask you about, is the Luminator, and how is it? It looks like he's using a Polaroid camera. What has been adjusted or changed in that camera that it's picking up different visual frequencies, or what's different about it?
Okay, the camera itself has not been modified, except that the flash has been taped over.
Okay.
Because that would presumably overwhelm the actual energy that they're trying to photograph. Mark puts a little pinhole in that tape so that there is a little bit of a flash, but basically you want to capture the actual room light and not overwhelm the subtle energies with the energy of the flash. That's my understanding.
So, it's got this name Luminator. How's it different from just a Polaroid camera other than the flash?
Oh, sorry. No, the Luminator is a separate device.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it came through in my video, but it's like, it looks like about a 4.5 foot tall.
Oh, okay. I understand. I was paying attention to that part, but for some reason in my mind, it was the camera that was the primary thing that was being discussed. Okay. So my last little thing is, have you looked into a gentleman by the name of Harry Oldfield from the UK, who has also been he's since passed, been working on cameras that pick up a wider range of visible spectrum for very similar purposes?
I have heard of him, but I'm not familiar with his work.
Okay,
So
well, I would
have
suggest, yes. In fact, I have one of his cameras, and I've been playing with it. But apparently, you can at least pick up different energetics as they occur.
Mm-hmm.
And I know some practitioners are using it for diagnosing physical anomalies or physical ailments. And then there's also an SLS camera, which is a gaming camera that has been used by, ghost hunters, use it. It creates that stick figure image. I have seen that camera in use and working in very evidential ways, but not only that, I have seen it show a portal. And it's only in, I don't know if anybody else besides the couple who I met who has discovered this has ever experienced anything similar. But not only does it very evidentially show this anomaly, you can see the little stick figures climb out of it. And when you go to the location where this portal is, you can feel the energetics of it. It's like electromagnetic, tingly. It's energetic. And so those are all things you might actually want to look into.
Thank you.
Being interested in this topic, there's some amazing things going on, but most of that's all across the pond that I'm aware of.
All right. Well, the pond is very small these days.
It is.
So, or non-existent, depending on what frequency you're on. So, yeah, I'm looking at the chat here. Sonia Rinaldi, sure. Annabella Cardoso, you'll see her in my film. She's still active.
Well, and I think it's Harry Oldfield's son who's still selling the software for this camera. It's a Samsung. I've got it sitting here. It's an old Samsung Galaxy. I mean, they don't make this camera anymore, but you can buy them used. And I basically bought the camera and then purchased the software from him in order to experiment with it. But it has produced some amazing, interesting things.
I definitely want to find out more.
Okay.
If you can put your email address
I
in the
will
chat,
do.
I will send
Sure.
send you some questions.
Okay, sounds good.
So my question is about intention, because obviously if you're going to Sonia Rinaldi or to whomever using specific devices, your intention is to connect with someone on the other side. While last year I was at the ISF conference, the International Spiritualist Federation conference, and my sister had convened a panel asking various people, mostly mediums, what they expect to experience as they die. And she asked me to video it. So she handed me her phone, and I'm hopeless with technology. But when Lionel Owen was speaking, I was videoing him, and I have to admit there were several shots of the floor in between them. But suddenly there were all kinds of lights and a dove and all kinds of things that appeared on the screen. And I kept looking at the camera, and it was there, and I put the camera down and it wasn't there. So that was certainly no intention on my part, but there was something else going on that the camera captured.
Interesting.
Well, one wonders how often this sort of thing takes place just in the course of people's lives, and they don't know what's going on, or they're afraid to talk about it, and then it just sort of passes. I mean, I guess it's like anything else connected with the so-called paranormal. How do we know how paranormal it is? Maybe it's perfectly normal, and we just can't talk about it. So I'm curious always as to how much of these kinds of things occur. I know that many of them occur spontaneously to people, in the form of communications, electronic stuff, and just physical objects moving, that sort of thing, things appearing and disappearing. And if we could only gather all this information and evidence without prejudice, I think we'd be living in a different world overnight.
Sure. Hey, Dan, nice to see you.
Gina?
I've never heard of the Luminator, so this is so cool. I haven't heard of most of this stuff, so it's always fascinating. First question, what is a soul phone?
Oh, the soul phone is it doesn't exist yet, but it's a project that Gary Schwartz has been working on. Gary is, you might say, a rather colorful character. And whether he will actually accomplish his stated goal, I guess we'll get to find out. I think his heart's in the right place. Whether he can raise the considerable funds that he apparently needs to do this, I have no idea. I've spent some time with him, and I honor his work, and I wish him luck. Because what can I say?
The other question, more is it in an agreement statement with Sherry and Dan regarding ITC and all the rest. I have been curious about ITC, or wishing it happened for me, since I'd first heard of it back early on, the original Challenger stuff, when I was doubting all of my own channelings, because I just couldn't believe all this was happening to me. And so I was really wishing that it'd come through the radio or somebody else's computer system, not my brain. For the very sake of authenticity, and I still am wishing for some evidential stuff through the ITC work.
Dan, one of my favorite people on this group, Sherry Pearl, mentioned the work of Sonia Rinaldi, and I've been following her work for a while, especially since I came across this picture from Sonia that I believe strongly to be a picture of my daughter. So my question to you is, how does your work with the Illuminator compare to that of Sonia? Do they complement each other, or what? What do you think?
Well, I think the general answer is that everything complements everything else. I have not personally worked with the Illuminator. My closest connection with that has been Mark Macy's work. Well, I've obviously collected some of the Luminator photos and find them endlessly fascinating, of course. I think Sonia's work is very important. I tend, in connection with her work, I tend more to cite ITC situations that don't set up. I'm not even sure what I don't know if there's a uniform word for it, but with EVP, there's can be the introduction of gibberish or particular kinds of background noise and so on. And with Sonia's work, there's the interjection of certain visual elements, transparent materials, reflective materials, and so forth. And I think it's important to try whatever works. Absolutely, I have no judgments about it. But in my own work, I tend to cite more the work that occurs either spontaneously or with no or a minimum of introducing elements on the experimenter's part. The information that comes through cleanly without any particular manipulation is what interests me most. That doesn't exclude the other material, but I think that in terms of educating the public on the reality of these communications, the less manipulation and the less structure, the better. The skeptics, don't get me started about skeptics, or I call them pseudo-skeptics. The skeptics always tend to have the last word in terms of in the public forum. This is going on right now with the whole UFO revelation business, where they're trotting out the same old skeptical arguments as they've been doing for 75 years, and the public is eating it up. So I think it's important, while we should experiment in all directions and by all different means, I think it's important that we emphasize the cleanest data, if you will. And that may be a matter of some subjective judgment, but that's my feeling about it.
Oh, well, thank you for that. But I would point out the Illuminator, you said, used some type of supercharged fluid, which might be similar to some of the stuff that Sonia does.
Well, I think it's only roughly analogous, because Sonia is using visual devices to produce a visual material. In the case of the Illuminator, the
Just
machine is
still.
turned on, it's sitting in the corner, and it doesn't have any bearing on the actual visual information. So I think there are all kinds of distinctions and subtle differences in all of these
Oh,
practices.
okay.
So I think certainly the Luminator is evidential in that when it's switched off, these effects don't occur. When it's switched on, they occur. So, and how the physics and all that of how it works, I think at this point we can only generalize about it. Experiment and find out what works best.
Dan, I think you just answered my question, because I wanted to know what's the theory behind the Illuminator. I've never heard of it before, whether it's air movement or a vibration, or we don't know.
The closest we can come are theories about subtle fields involving reverse electron spin, which is a term in physics, which does not literally mean spin. It's a characteristic of fundamental particles. We don't know. I don't think we have the language of physics beyond a certain point. I think that quantum physics is pushing the boundary of that, because it goes beyond certainly the standard model of Newtonian physics. But at that point, it's very abstract. We can't really wrap our heads around it. And so I think that's why our focus is best put on the practical aspects of experimenting and so on. And until we can actually understand the principles involved at a deep level, I think we just best stick to the practical, to the practice of these things. And the more we do them, the better it works. I think that's an important thing. We may discover over time factors that inhibit or promote these things. It may be space weather, the magnetic phenomena that surround the Earth, phase of the moon, astrological configurations. I think we have a lot to learn about these things in a genuinely solid, repeatable way. I think we're just in our infancy now, and I'm not. I think that this work tends to be confined to a relatively, as far as we know, a relatively small community, and so there's a lot of talent out there that I think could be engaged with this if it were scientifically acceptable.
Right. Dan, I'm not a skeptic, but I'd like to talk about that little video that you did, and what you intended by it, because I couldn't really see in those pictures anything paranormal that you would think. It mainly looked, as you said, that the skeptics said double exposures or that sort of thing, but I know Polaroids can't do that. But I'd like to have seen some captions maybe of the names of the people that you were showing with the Luminator anyway, and perhaps a little more information about each exposure, what you saw in it and why you chose it.
Thank you for that. This, as I say, was the first rough cut of this little video, and my intention is to put more attention on the individual photographs, to put pointers on them, to show what people are seeing in them. The other thing is that if you're on Zoom on a small screen, it may not be easy to see some of these fine points. The other thing is that these Polaroids were not well exposed to begin with. I shouldn't say that. They were properly exposed, but for some reason they all turned out on the dark side. I can process them to some extent before the image kind of really falls apart. On some of these, I've actually, in the video I just showed, there are a few parts where the two faces are cut out and set separately. And if you watch it again, I'll probably put this on YouTube at some point in the near future, and maybe make it private to our group for a while until I'm satisfied with a fine edit.
I was at Mark Macy's Luminator workshop at the Edgar Cayce Center in New York City. It was amazing. So I can testify that people had their loved ones come through in very, very clear Polaroids. And I had very clear images. One looked like my father. What happened is sometimes half the face was the loved one and half the face is the person being photographed. So it would be split. And I'm in his book, Spirit Faces. Dan, do you know that book?
Sorry, which book?
Spirit Faces that Mark put out of all his Luminator photos.
I don't have that book. I'm looking at the chat right now, and it says, can you use the Luminator with a cell phone camera, and are they for sale? I think only 7 of them were ever built by Richards before he passed away. And one of them I know is in the hands of Jack Stuckey, who's still a practitioner, lives in Colorado. A few were sent to the UK. One woman who had been working with it passed away, I think, last year. And there was a gentleman there as well. I've not been in touch. Had not been in touch with them. There may be, as Sally has pointed out, with the various camera devices, there may be other avenues to pursue that will produce the same effect. Unfortunately, as Lisa mentioned, the workshops, most of the people in the workshops took their Polaroids home. The ones that I have are just happened to be the few that Mark had or that he gave to me after some of these sessions. So we don't have access to a huge amount of data here.
Yeah, I just found Spirit Faces on eBay, a bunch of copies. So should I put the link in the chat?
Please.
Amazon also has them available hardcover for $20 and a Kindle format.
Oh, great.
Great.
One
That's
of
good.
mine is in there. He included 2 of mine. It's a man's face, probably a guide or somebody I didn't recognize.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Back to Richard. Richard was next.
Hello, Dan. Great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Christina mentioned that she didn't see any paranormal phenomena in the pictures, but I did, and I'll tell you what it was. Maybe the first or second picture, you showed a subject, and to their left were 2 looked like entities with dark faces. And I have seen that. And it was years ago in the early 80s. I was taking a psychic class, and the woman that was running it had each of us in turn stand up against a white wall in a darkened room. And the class would look at the person, and there was one where I saw entities like that just sort of string out on both sides of her. And there were probably, I don't know, 8, 10 of them, but they looked very similar to what you photographed. Their faces were dark and, well, I should say, sort of a light brown. You couldn't make out any features like your picture. And they were sort of shrouded in white. Now, this was the early 80s, so no one, of course, had a cell phone and no one had a camera, but I'm just thinking that if anyone wanted to try to do that experiment again with a camera, they might capture those images, because the interesting thing was that everyone in the class could see them, because it wasn't just me that could see them. Others would say, look at all of them. And so they could actually see these figures, but they look very similar to what you photographed.
Well, Richard, I think what I might do is, if I can share my screen again, I'm going to bring up the video player, and I'm just going to go to various images and show you what I see in them, and see how many others get it as well. Okay, so here's this woman's face, eyes, nose, mouth. Here's the second face, eye, nose, mouth. This face is looking directly at the camera. This face is looking toward the lower right. Okay. Let's go through here more. Okay, here's this gentleman's face. Here's a second face behind him. Here's the eye, the hairline, the ear.
Do you think that's the same face, Dan?
It's a distortion of the same face, I think, but it's hard to tell. All we see is the eyebrow, the eye that's slanted down here, some representation of an ear, the hairline. Is everyone seeing my cursor?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Okay.
And there was one you showed, Dan, of a man that seemed to have glasses on, but the doubled face did not have glasses, it seemed.
Right. Let's go through these and we'll get to that. Here's this woman. This is her real face. And down here you see these two eyes and nostrils here. So let's move on a bit. There's the second face, which has a rather blank or sad expression to it. The mouth has more emphasized on this side. The nostrils are asymmetrical, and the eyes have a sort of a blank look to them. Here are the two faces separated. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. This is my favorite. These photos were taken a few minutes apart, which is why this one isn't wearing the same sweater. She had taken the sweater off, but this is this same person. As you can see, the characteristics of the face are quite different. The eyes are closer together. The mouth is smaller. There's an asymmetrical bulge here in the cheek. And another characteristic of the Luminator, by the way, is that vertical lines above the face will streak into the face like this. And this is without any camera movement at all. But this is a repeated pattern with the Luminator, that if there's a vertical line, like the edge of a window or a curtain or whatever, it will streak down into the face. And that's basically impossible. Okay, this is a photo taken of me by Mark. And as you can see, there are two distinct images. You can see this is actually a TV set behind me, and there's this object sitting on top. And in the second exposure, it's distorted. And okay, these are my eyes, little reflections in my glasses. These are reflections from the little flash. And here is a whole second face looking down to the lower right. Oh, another very odd characteristic of the Luminator is, I don't know if you can see these streaks, these squiggly streaks coming down from here. Notice that these reflections in my glasses are not streaked at all. But these two lights are streaked. This is a complete anomaly. Going a little forward, here's a close-up. That's my real face, and there you can see the eye and nose, which is distorted. It's like the fascinating thing about some of these is that these two images are as viewed from different places in the room, different places in space. Because here, my eyes are looking directly toward the camera. And here, they're obviously, this eye is obviously looking in this direction. The bridge of the nose here looks straight, and yet here's another view of the nose that's taken from a lower angle, from literally a different place in space than the camera was. And then the mouth here is just sort of a very crude representation of a frowning mouth. So here you have an image that's been perceived from at least 3 different angles in space. You've got the actual camera position here. You've got a position to the lower right of the face and a position underneath looking up. Now that to me as a photographer is utterly fascinating. So these views are independent of the literal position of the camera. Now, this one is a real head scratcher. Again, you have this. You have a double face here. You've got the mouth and the cheeks here, doubled down here in a very kind of distorted way. You've got this one little light here that's streaked in a squiggly way, and yet nothing else in the photo is streaked in that way. Then you have these three representations of this woman's hand. Okay, here's the close-up again. Face, where the hands are just bizarrely transformed. These fingers, there are three sets of hands here. The fingers are kind of gnarly and strangely positioned and seen from different angles. This almost looks like a foot with a toe here. Now, how does that happen? Here is, it's hard to see the second face in this one, but in this one, yes, you have you have the actual person standing there looking directly at the camera. Then you have the second face, which is looking again towards the lower right. And it either has a mustache or is just has an exaggerated frown. It's hard to tell. But this is clearly different from the actual face, which is quite obscured by the second face. That's quite unusual. Then you have this appearance of our friend John Denver superimposed over the subject. And I think that's it. In this one, there's one that's just streaked. Yeah, in this one, there's no second face, but these wisps of hair come straight down. This cheek line is distorted into this vertical line. And once again, you have this bright edge of this woodwork here that's streaked down into the face. That's actually the edge of a window frame. There was a light just out of frame on this side. But this bright spot is, again, streaking all the way into the front of the subject. And that, again, is a common characteristic of these Luminator images. So I think we'll stop the screen share there. Okay, any questions about those images, or is there anyone who didn't see those anomalies now that we've pointed them out?
Thank you, Dan. That's exactly what I wanted. Thank you.
Yeah, in the final version of this video, that will be done with pointers and so on, so people can't miss it.
Yeah, I'm just curious if you know, in the image that seems to have John Denver show up, does that individual have any relationship to him or any connection with him in life? Do you have any idea? Okay.
I have no idea.
But
idea.
It does look like it.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, those we were grateful to those folks for sticking around.
Exactly.
Hi, Dan. I just was curious. On the pictures that you showed, where they have the looks like kind of white light, and I know that you described that as being maybe something from a curtain or something behind them that it would come down and over them. But do you think that could be like the camera catching the person's like subtle energy?
I have no idea. I would imagine that the subtle energy would be present in the image as a whole. But I find that streaking curious because it does not happen at all with horizontal lines. There's some of these photos where there's this cross-hatched window frame behind them. The horizontal lines are fine. It's that vertical line above the head that travels down into the foreground of the picture. I've never seen that in any other context. And there are also sometimes in some of Mark's shots, there's a source of light that's just out of the frame, and that may streak into the image a little bit, but that's not paranormal. But this is, and it's as far as I know, there's no explanation for it.
So I noticed that in the regular picture, the person is, has their more uplifted facial expression.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second face is, it always seems to be very, very serious, almost somber.
That's true, and not all of them, but in some of them. And this raises the question, and this I think Patrick Richards addressed in his diagnostic use of the Luminator, that some of these images may represent aspects of the psyche of the individual, where it's clearly not someone else. I think that's a reasonable theory, and that the sad faces or the frustrated looking faces may represent, just inner conditions that are otherwise unacknowledged. Does the emotional or astral level of the being may be coming through there in that kind of expression. We have very little language to describe this, but we, the fact of it is undeniable, which I think is the important thing, at least at our current stage of understanding. So, I think we have a lot to learn about these and a lot to learn about ourselves. And if things like the Luminator can help to illuminate, our own natures to us, then I think it can be a valuable tool. Unfortunately, I think it's past its time, and is mainly at this point a curiosity. But other tools may be available to us, and I think this is all worth experimenting with. As vehicles for getting to know ourselves better and getting to understand the bigger picture.
Dan, didn't you do some work with a fellow who was able to project his thoughts onto film, photography?
Ted Sirios?
Yeah, I think it was him.
No, I never worked with him personally, but I was fascinated by his work, and his work includes some of these same kinds of sort of random anomalies. I think probably he didn't need the Luminator; he had himself, and perhaps some of the same principles were at work. I don't know, but his work is certainly worth following up for people who are interested in this field. And thank you for bringing it up.
And do you remember, of course, some of the early mediums were doing spirit photography, and some of them were fake, but some of them were genuine. Those, and you would actually get the photos coming up.
Right, and that's another hard one to track down. In Calling Earth, I show a sampling of a few of these early spirit photographs, and I think the ones that are most suspect are the ones where the living subjects are already composed in the right part of the frame, so that there is room for the spirit.
There's room for the spirit between them, yeah.
Right, and then of course some of those were done very crudely with dolls and models and paintings and so on. But some of them are very hard to debunk. I have not done an extensive work on early spirit photography. That's a whole another project. So
well, there you go.
But it's true, there was a lot of good work done back then, and when there was not a whole lot of technology available to fake things, but even just ordinary old-fashioned darkroom techniques, if they're properly and skillfully employed, can produce some remarkably paranormal imagery.
And whatever happened to the aura photos that we all used to see? Is there any evidence in that they're actually getting anything apart from a entertaining value?
That was a technical trick. The photos were a technical trick, but they were as I understand it, they were a biofeedback device, which did reflect to some extent people's internal states, but they projected them as these artificial images of auras. These are the ones that showed up at New Age expos and so on
Yeah.
to entertain people. And they may have a legitimate use as a way of visualizing what do we used to call it? What were the electrostatic photographs that were named after this couple that worked with them, where people would have put their hands on the photographic film?
Curlian
Curlian.
photography.
Yes,
That's
thank
it.
you. Yes, yeah, that's another area that has not really been followed up well enough, in a rigorous scientific way. That was back in the 80s, I think, when most of that was going on. So there are a lot of things that have fallen by the wayside that, given the time and the funds, would certainly be worth digging up and experimenting with. To do any of this justice, it takes some investment. I know the experimental work that's being done by the Institute of Noetic Sciences and others is often funded by, there's a single foundation, the Bial Foundation. It seems to be almost the sole source of funding for so many people who want to experiment along these lines. So there's not a whole lot of philanthropy involved. There should be more, but it's tough because it's hard to know where to begin. The philanthropist in question would already, like Robert Bigelow, for example, would already have to be involved in these investigations.
Yeah.
You can't just pull people out of the culture and say, here, hey, this is worthwhile. Please fund it. It's a lot more complicated than that. Yeah.
Yeah, Dan, thanks so much. I really appreciated your presentation today. And so do you remember Dr. Bernie Siegel had done some work with his exceptional cancer patients where he would have them draw and he would then divide the picture into quadrants and he would be able to see kind of the future of that particular child, like how long they were going to live and all that kind of stuff. When I see your photography or the photography that you shared with us today, that image is looking down and to the right. Do you have any idea what that represents and why that's consistent?
That's an excellent observation, and the answer is I have no idea.
Yet.
It's true that the second faces tend to be down and to the right, at least in the photos that I have in my collection. That they seem to be viewed from the lower right, and so on. That I have no idea, but thank you for bringing that up.
It's an interesting point.
I look forward to your answer in the future.
Well, if there is one.
Thank you so much.
I'm just a regular Joe playing with this stuff. I don't have any answers, and I honestly I don't even know what level the answers would come from. I think we're dealing with a level that's fairly close to the Earth plane, and that I suppose one could communicate with. I don't know who the agencies are that make this happen. I know in the Skoll experiment, it was announced by a number of their communicators that they themselves were not, they weren't responsible for bringing the energy through to the physical plane, that there were other entities or agencies that could make that translation, that the information, the intelligence, and the words were coming from the other side, but the way they came through to the physical involved some whole other intermediary process. And
I always heard it was that ETs were looking after the technology. Even Sonia talks about working with ETs. And
what's an ET?
Exactly.
Right. I think that we have this rather narrow definition of little green men from Mars, or the classic grays and so on. I don't think we have the beginnings of a clue about who and what is out there on the physical level, on other levels, those who are dimensionally mobile. It's fairly obvious that to the extent that UFOs arrive from incredibly distant places in space, they've got to translate through dimensions because they ain't going to get here physically in the conventional way.
Yeah.
My own experience with that is limited to quite a number of Ouija board sessions that I used to do years ago with a wonderfully psychically talented friend of mine. And at one point we it was funny. I'd asked a question and the guides on the other side said, well, that's not our department. We have to call in someone who can give you an answer. And so this incredibly strong energy came into the room. It's very kind of masculine energy, and announced itself, gave a name. And long story short, we had a number of conversations with this group of beings who claimed that they had been around our planet for a couple of hundred years. They came from a place in space that was too distant to come here physically, so they had to come through in their higher bodies and then sort of create a working environment once they were here. We asked them, well, where are you right now? And the first time we asked them, they said, well, we're high over Rio de Janeiro and here in the room with you. And that answer alone told us quite a bit. Another time we asked them, well, where are you right now? And they said, we're over Cuba watching a baseball game. That we're intrigued with your mass spectator sports. We don't know what to make of them. They claimed that this particular group of probably just a half dozen entities had been around for 200 or so of our years. They're studying our culture. One night I was out on it's a long story, but I was out on a kind of a UFO watch up in Sonoma County here north of the Bay Area. And I was with a friend and mentioned the name of this entity. And as I mentioned the name, there are 3 bright flashes in the sky right where we were looking. And then a couple of hours later, we're kind of lying on our backs looking at the night sky. And I mentioned this name again, bam, three bright flashes exactly where we're looking. So, and that was followed by another anomalous sighting. So, my sense of it, and this is just, like one person's very limited experience in that kind of work. We don't have a clue. I see Sherry is losing it here.
I agree. We don't have a clue. And the more that I learn, the more I know it's a mystery. And I'm happy to let it be a mystery because I spent so many years trying to figure out things that I finally understood. My brain can't wrap itself around when they say time is simultaneous. I understand intellectually what it means, but as long as I am incarnated in this, I'm going to experience time as a series of moments. And so after a while, I just get to the point where I agree with Dan, experiment. I tell people all the time, just try, just play around because spirit will interact with you, but you got to put your toe in the water. And let's just experiment, and hopefully we learn a little bit.
Thanks,
But we're
Cheryl.
seeing a small vision. We're seeing a small piece, is what I feel.
Yeah.
And there's a much bigger picture, and to me, that's a mystery. But yeah, that's why I was waving my hands.
Thanks,
But
Cheryl.
as humans, I think we need to honor our limitation as humans. We're not going to fit 100 pounds of consciousness into the 5-pound bag of the human being. It ain't gonna work. But I think we can go much farther than we have, and at least to integrate the question into our lives collectively. We may not have the answers, but we certainly have the questions. And I think the more we share those questions, the more likely we are to end up with, if not answers as we think of them, at least a deeper level of understanding in general about life and consciousness. So, end of rant.
Steve, do you want to come in on this?
Steve?
Yeah, just to kind of throw some extra fuel on the fire here. Lately, I've been going back into my studies of scalar wave technology. Have you heard of that, Dan?
Yes, I have.
I put a link in the chat, which is kind of a whole history of radionics and scalar wave technology. And I'm thinking this is a kind of an area that probably could be used to do spirit photography. Let's call it that. Because Mr. Abrams and others, there's a woman named Ruth Drown, Drown. She was able to diagnose people with they would put their feet on two metal plates, and she could diagnose them by figuring out the frequencies, and then reverse the frequencies and heal them. I'm thinking they can do spooky stuff like that. They were doing this back in the 40s and 50s, by the way. This seems to be something that's been forgotten. So I encourage everybody to take a look at that link and see if we can come up with a device that might be useful in spirit photography. Why not?
Well, I think the more that, again, a lot of this comes down to language. I think the more we use the notion of the greater reality, rather than compartmenting it into extraterrestrial, extra-dimensional, afterlife, this, and these older categories are perfectly understandable. But I think that to make sense of them, we need to step back and see that there's a larger context. That afterlife and ET are, in some sense, in the same bag. And there may be other things that are staring us in the face that we haven't had language for or haven't acknowledged culturally that may also be part of this. I think certain aspects of scientific work that haven't really been named yet. I think that things like the scalar wave practices and so on are part of this, and I think it puts a huge responsibility on our shoulders to manage all this wisely, because we're dealing with forces that are bigger than all of us. And I think probably we've had some quiet help in keeping things relatively contained, you might say. I don't think the culture at large, certainly not the whole diversity of Earth cultures and religions and political philosophies and all, I don't think a whole lot of us are really ready to start incorporating this. I think at its best, it can start breaking down boundaries and ideologies. And, I'm sure those of us in this group have our own potpourri of beliefs and perspectives, but our common understanding and our common feeling about all this brings us together in what is, it's a wonderful forum